with the Pike County Cooperative Extension Service. I wanted to start our winter feeding series this week with a little look at analyzing our forages to know the nutrient value of the hay that we feed. So, as I begin to share our presentation for analyzing forages for nutrient value, I want us to think about what we've done in the past and maybe some things that we could do to make our operation a little more efficient. Even if it's just a hobby farm, feeding is still the most expensive cost that you have. And nobody wants to throw money into a hobby, even. Uh, so hopefully we can do some changes and increase our profit margins and make farming a little more enjoyable and to bring some profit to it. Our objectives for today are to talk about the purpose of submitting samples for nutrient analysis. And then we're going to look at the proper ways to take a hay sample. And lastly, how to integrate our nutrient results into winter feeding considerations. So number one is why even do a nutrient analysis? Well, one, your growing environments change every year and your storage methods affect the nutrient availability when we feed that hay to our cattle. By growing environment, I mean this, was it a drought or was it a wet year? Both of those things change nutrient levels. Sometimes wet years make really bad hay, makes a lot of it, but not a lot of nutrients. So we need to know what is there. Fertility is also a growing environment, as well as the stage of the grass when you cut it. All of those things affect the nutrient availability in that hay. Storage methods, such as whether we store them under a tree line, whether we store them out in an open field with plenty of sunshine, or maybe we store them under roof, such as a shed or maybe an old chicken house that you have. All of those definitely change the amount of waste that we have and how many of the nutrients stayed within that hay after we baled it. So guessing on nutrient requirements really wastes money. In other words, you don't know what your hay nutrition is. So how do you know if you're overdoing supplementation or not doing enough? Compromising all of our systems in our livestock is one of the effects that might could happen. So your digestive system, it has to have the right nutrients and the right texture. The cardio system, the respiratory system, all of those things use nutrients and energy, especially. And if we're not providing enough energy, especially in the wintertime when the systems really get stressed out, then we might not be maximizing this animal's potential like we could. Obviously, we're going to decrease our average daily gain if we're not providing enough nutrients. If I'm expending more calories than I'm taking in, then I lose weight. Typically not a problem for me, but for our animals, we really have to think about that. And we don't always know what the weather's going to throw at us, but we have a pretty good idea of what that animal's nutritional needs are going to be every single day. And we need to make sure that we know what our hay is providing so we can tell what our supplementation should be providing. And lastly, you just leave a lot of many quality control measures into question because you don't know what you're feeding. You don't know what else is lacking. And if there's an issue, you don't know if it's nutritional or is it environmental, what is going on. So a lot of times if we know what our nutrition is, we can either say that's the problem or rule it out from the get-go. By doing a forage test, it allows a producer to utilize research-proven science to guide feeding decisions. In other words, it's not just an opinion or a guess, that you can go back on research and say, this really works. For example, you might want to separate your cattle out by development stage. Obviously, cows that are in lactation have a much greater need than those that are in early gestation. Uh, Steer calves that are growing out are going to have a higher need than maybe your replacement heifers that are yearlings. So there's a lot of differences there that we are feeding for, but a lot of times we just put out the same bag of cubes and the same hay bale and hope that it meets everybody's needs. If we know what we're feeding, then we can separate those animals out and give them what they really truly need. And then we can maximize their production potential. We know that there's genetic potential. We spend a lot of money on really good bulls or really good replacement heifers because of the genetic potential. But genetic potential will only take you so far if nutrition is lacking. Uh, so let's make sure that they reach their genetic potential by giving them all the building blocks to get there. And lastly, a forage test is cost efficient, it's dependable, and it takes very little effort. The biggest effort is actually collecting the sample. Um, it's pretty cheap, so I don't see a really good reason why we would skip this very important step of our operation. Sorry, I went too far there. So just a rundown of the proper steps to taking a forage sample. I will say there are tons of YouTube videos to talk about all of these steps. And I'm a visual learner and I learn much better by watching that video. But just here's in a nutshell what we've got to do. One, we've got to select a time to take those samples. For me, I like to take those 30 days after we harvest. So you've cut the hay, you've baled it, it's in the field. Hopefully we're going to maybe somewhere under roof. We'll just use that as our example anyway. Obviously, if it's under roof, the next time I put hay, it's going to be a lot harder to get to that. Plus, if we're just sampling all 500 bales of hay that we needed for the winter at one time, it's very hard for us to remember when each of those were baled. And I think that that's a vital part of our nutrient, of our forage sample. So what I'd like to suggest is that you've processed your hay, you've moved it wherever you're going to store it, but you go ahead and you leave it there for 30 days. And then right before you cut the next cutting of hay, go through and take a forage sample and bring it to the extension office and we'll mail it off for you and get your results. And by the time you get through with your other cutting of hay and getting it put up, hopefully your samples will be in and you can put that away in your files. And the same thing happens the next time. 30 days after we build it, I take another sample, then I go cut harvest number 3, process it and put it in the barn. That just allows, that 30 days allows that your temperatures kind of level off, microbes level off, and you get a little truer picture of really where you stand. Right after you've baled it, it's not a real true picture of what your bale of hay is going to actually be when you feed it. So this kind of just helps out to give us an idea of where we stand going into the season. And I think it's just one of those habits that we could start that would really be a benefit to us. Number 2 is just to make sure that you're pushing towards the center of the bale. And number 3 tells us where to do that. So we really want to go from the middle of the bale down towards the hay, down towards the ground. Anything above that might allow a hole for water to collect in, especially if you're storing outside, where rainwater would collect and soak into the bale. And that's really not what we want. So if we do it on the other half of that, where the water probably is running off, we want to have that issue, okay? Make sure that you always do it on the rounded side and not on the flat side. If you have square bales, make sure that you do those from the sides and not from the ends. And number 4 talks about to make sure that you have enough cores to create a composite that's 1/2 to 1 pound, okay? And number 5, I just say put all those in a Ziploc bag and bring it to the office. So a lot of collectors these days will actually have a place for a gallon bag to go on there. Honestly, if you've got a gallon worth of forage, you've got plenty. Excuse me. About a half gallon is more than enough. So you don't have to fill that gallon bag up, but it is a good idea to kind of think big, okay? If you're going to do a grab sample, I definitely need at least a gallon bag full. Here we have the form that we'll fill out when we send your forage sample off. On the left-hand side, obviously we need your demographics and such, but that routine test that I've highlighted there for $18 is probably all that you're going to need. The next step is that you need to select which one. So for here, we're talking about hay. Give it an ID, whether that's first cutting, whatever pasture or what have you. Or if you bought it from somebody, maybe you could put that in there. But a simple way for you to remember what hay is what. Okay, so it makes sense to you. It doesn't have to make sense to us. You also want to put the variety in there. So on the left hand side, you're going to see all kinds of options underneath forages. For many of you, that'll be Bermuda grass. You may have Bahia grass, or it may fit under a mix better for you. Okay, whatever is the predominant forage in the field is what we need to list here. So we'll fill those things out. We need you to leave a check with us for the amount due to the lab, and you'll make that up to University of Arkansas, leave it with us, and we'll ship it. Most offices pay for the shipping, so all that you're probably going to be out is the $18. I've made a note down at the bottom that if you choose Dairy One, you cannot send a sample more than 100 grams. If you do that, they're going to charge you. With the U of A lab, we don't charge for overages, but Dairy One does. So if you don't use our lab and you use Dairy One, which is another common lab to use, just be aware of that, okay? When you get your samples back in, these are the things that we're going to look at. So on the right-hand side, I have the whole report listed so that you kind of have an idea what it's going to look like. And then I zoomed in on the left-hand side. So the first thing in green is dry matter. So our dry matter on this hay on a dry matter basis is 71%, okay? Our crude protein for this one is 9.3%, and our calculated total digestible nutrients for ruminants is 54.8%. In this table from the nutrient table MPs, and if you need one of those, your county agent can help you to find these. They're also on our website, and at the bottom I have that MP down there. So you can go to UAEX, search for MP 391, and this book will pull up. Point out a few things about our example. I have looked for 1,200-pound calves. So that means at slaughter weight, this animal's goal is 1,200 pounds. We are currently at 500 pounds, which is what I have underlined. And then you'll see that our average daily gain is 1 pound a day. Very light. I know you're probably going to want more than that, but this is just our example. So if I want 1 pound of gain on these 500-pound steers less than a year old, I need at least 6.5% TDN, and I need 6.7% on crude protein. I'm sorry, this TDN was in pounds. That would be 67%. And our crude protein requirements is 9.7%, okay? So our hay that we had, I put it into pounds in here, but doesn't necessarily have to be that way. But basically, we need 9.7 and 67, and the hay that we had is 9.3 and 54.8. So we don't meet the TDN requirement. That's going to be something that needs a little more supplementation. We're really close to the crude protein requirement, just 0.4% off. So will our hay need to be supplemented? Yes, but more for TDN than it does for crude protein. We're going to go quickly through a Pearson Square, and I've given you some resources here. One, I found the ingredient information from the OSU calculator ration balancer. In a future episode of the winter feeding series, we're going to go through this program. So you might want to go ahead and Google the OSU calculator, download it onto your computer, and we'll talk about how to use it at another time. Also, FSA 3080 which can be, again, found at our uaex.edu website. Gives step-by-step instructions for the Pearson Square. If you're like me, you like something with paper in front of you that you can look at and follow step by step, it does that, and it's very handy to have on hand when you need it, okay? For the Pearson Square, we need at least 2 ingredients. And we have 2 ingredients today. We have hay, and we're going to use range cubes, okay? To set this up, in the middle is our requirement. So this one is for crude protein. We needed 9.7% crude protein. Our hay provided 9.3, and our range cubes provides 28%. So we subtract what's on the left hand from the middle. So that gives us 0.4, and 28 minus 9.7 is 18.3. Remember, this can never be a negative. So whichever way the arrows really need to go is the way the arrows need to go. After we get our 18.3 and our 0.4, we add those together to get 18.7 for a total, okay? You divide the difference by the total. So we divide 18.3 by 18.7, and we get 0.97. And a percentage, that means that this mix needs to be 97% hay to meet our crude protein. 0.4 divided by 18.7 gave us 0.02. So we need 2% of our mix to be range cubes to meet our crude protein requirement, okay? So very simply, if we were mixing 100 pounds, 97 pounds would be hay, and 2 pounds would be range cubes to meet our crude protein requirement. A little different requirement is our TDN that we have on the right-hand side, right? So our requirement is 67%, our hay provided 54.8%, and our range cubes provide 76%. We subtract the 2 and do our x's, so 54.8 minus 67 gave us 12.2, 76 minus 67 gave us 9. We add 9 plus 12.2 to get 21.2. We divide what we have by the total, and that gives us 52% hay and 57% range cubes to meet our TDN. So you can see that there's a little bit difference there. We need to supplement more for TDN than we do hay. So we either need to change our hay to a little different TDN requirement, bump that up a little bit, and we might can even some things out, or we're just going to have to feed a greater percentage of range cubes to get that energy out, okay? I actually had originally done more steps to this, but I think that it's a little more confusing. So if you need more information on the Pearson Square, I highly encourage you to go to FSA 3080. But I think the example that we did today should be able to help you to see just a general gist of what you need, or make sure that what you're mixing isn't like totally cuckoo, okay? Always remember that you can rely upon your county extension agent to help you with any kind of balance ration, or if you have questions on feeding your livestock. And we have some great specialists we can turn to if we don't know that answer. And as always, you can find us online at uaex.edu. I appreciate you for tuning in to this episode of the Winter Feeding Series, and see you next time.